Tonight at 10, the Queen's grandchildren hold a solemn vigil at her lying in state ahead of the funeral on Monday. Led by the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Sussex, they all took their places around the coffin in Westminster Hall. It's the first time in history a monarch's grandchildren have performed the ceremony.
Complete privilege, absolute privilege to see them honouring their grandmother. A moment that I won't ever forget.
To see her grandchildren sort of respecting her like that was so moving, really moving.
Thousands continue to queue to see the lying in state, and earlier those near the front had a surprise visit. King Charles greeted mourners, thanking those who'd waited through the night. The current waiting time is 17 hours. The accessible queue has closed for good. Also tonight, Ukraine says more Western weaponry is needed to beat the Russians as bodies are recovered from a mass burial site newly liberated in northeastern Ukraine. Hundreds protest outside New Scotland Yard over the shooting dead of the unarmed black man Chris Cabba. And football pays tribute to the Queen in the first full weekend of fixtures since her death. Good evening. The Queen's 8 grandchildren, including Princes William and Harry, have held a vigil at her lying in state in Westminster Hall. It's the first time in history that a monarch's grandchildren have performed such a ceremony on their death. Earlier, the King and the Prince of Wales met members of the public, queuing to pay their respects to the Queen. They thanked those who waited through the night. Others hoping to see the lying in state have been warned the general queue could close any time if there are too many people. The waiting time is currently around 17 hours, with long lines stretching 5 miles along the River Thames to Southwark Park. The Queen's coffin will be moved to Westminster Abbey for the state funeral on Monday morning. Here's our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
They had wanted to mount their own tribute to their grandmother, the Queen's 4 grandsons and 4 granddaughters. Led by Prince William, behind him Prince Harry, given permission by his father to wear uniform for the first time since he stepped back from royal duties. On the signal of the officer of the watch, the 8 grandchildren mounted the catafalque to take their positions. They stood with their heads bowed. William at the head of the coffin, Harry at the foot. From Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, a written tribute to their grandmother today, they described her as the loving hand on our backs, leading us through the world. The grandchildren's vigil lasted for 15 minutes, a tribute to match that mounted last night by the King and his brothers and sister. The royal family coming together to both share in and lead the public mourning. Earlier, the King and the Prince of Wales had met some of those waiting in the long queue for the lying in state. The monarch and his successor demonstrating that there is now a slightly more relaxed style at the head of the House of Windsor. Both Charles and William have a natural warmth, appreciated today by people who'd queued through a cold night along the banks of the Thames to reach Westminster Hall. This clearly was a supportive crowd. No one needed to be won over. But watch the interactions with the King. The handshakes tended to linger a little.
We love you, Mum.
And arms were patted. It was a brief moment of personal contact, not always helped by the ever-present mobile phones.
Phones down, please. We come fast. Enjoy the moment.
You get too frozen last night.
Both the King and his son wanted to know how people were coping with the long wait.
You look like you're a dress man, you've got a rucksack on, you've read the manual. So this team have been managing what we call Sector 2.
Just before the walkabout, the King had visited one of the main control rooms where the Metropolitan Police is coordinating the immense operation being mounted by all the emergency services, possibly the biggest such operation London has ever seen.
The Prime Minister of Australia, Your Majesty.
Then this afternoon at Buckingham Palace, a series of audiences with Prime Ministers of some of the other countries where the British monarch is head of state.
The Prime Minister of Jamaica, Your Majesty.
Some are already reviewing their links with the British Crown. Decisions on that are for the future. Their priority now is to pay their tributes to their Queen. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visited the lying-in state. Another visitor was Australia's Anthony Albanese, who's known to favour Australia becoming a republic. But a time of mourning is no time for politics, at least not publicly. Westminster Hall continues to be a place where citizens of the British nation and many others are coming to pay their respects. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, the accessible queue has been closed after reaching capacity, but the general queue remains open for now. Our correspondent Chichi Uzundu has been chatting to some of those who want to pay their respects to the Queen.
The grief of the grandchildren, among them the Prince of Wales, sharing their vigil with the public. Fortuitous timing for those paying their respects to the Queen.
We were so lucky today as well because the Queen's grandchildren were standing there and we were being there. After 13 hours waiting, it was really worth it.
So brave, especially young James. So that was really unexpected, but it was just so moving. So very, very moving. Complete privilege, absolute privilege to see them honouring their grandmother. A moment that I won't ever forget.
To see her grandchildren sort of respecting her like that was so moving, really moving.
It was a busy day for King Charles and William, who earlier personally thanked those queuing for hours.
But the back is gone.
General expression.
I never met the royal. This is the first time. It was amazing. We met both in one go. So the king and then the future king.
Good luck on your journey. I'm conscious I'm holding the queue up.
That queuing continued, with inventive ways to stave off the boredom for some.
We've been queuing for 13 hours.
How's it been?
Very dull.
It's been quite hard, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Chilly at times.
It's been tiring, but it's been fine. There's been good banter and the queue's been moving.
Tired. My feet are absolutely tired.
But in the accessible queue for disabled people, anger and confusion.
We've been in a queue since 1:15 and we've been told to come back between 2 and 3 a.m.
Yeah.
So now we've got to wander
So this is the
around.
other queue.
We started at 9:30. 9:30 we joined the queue.
9:30 this morning.
Yes.
And it's currently 5:15.
She's been very cold.
Yes.
And people have been worrying about her and making sure she's all wrapped up.
At 4:30 this afternoon, people were turned away after officials closed it permanently to new entrants.
It's been terrible. My daughter's got a hidden disability, but then also medical needs as well. So if I had the information yesterday that it was going to be an 8-hour queue, I probably would have chosen not to bring my 3 children.
Since the opening of the lying-in state on Wednesday evening to midnight last night, more than 700 people have been treated in the queue by paramedics, with 81 being admitted to hospital. Tomorrow is the final full day to visit the Queen's coffin, and tonight it's expected to be another cold night, but it's not putting off the thousands taking the time to pay their respects. Chichi Zundu, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Jonathan Blake is at the back of the queue in Southwark in southeast London. Jonathan, it is what, 16 minutes past 10 at night? Are people still joining the queue?
They are, Clive. They are being warned as they join the queue here in Southwark Park tonight that they face a long wait and a cold night ahead. But as you can probably see from the people streaming into the park, even now this evening at the beginning of the fourth night of the Queen's lying in state, that is doing nothing to put people off. We can say a quick hello to the Kennedy family from Southsea who've not long joined the queue. Tom, how are you feeling? You've got a long night ahead.
Confident, thank you.
Yeah? Are you well prepared? What have you got ready to keep you warm, keep you fed and watered?
Sweets, water, blankets, yeah.
Good. Sounds like
layers.
Lots of layers. Sounds like you're ready. Stephen, you served in the Royal Navy. Why did you want to come and pay your respects?
I served for 25 years with the Queen, and she served us for 70 years, so it was only a good thing that I bring myself and my family up here with me to show my respects. So I'm looking forward to it. Don't care how long I stand for.
OK, well, we wish you luck in the queue. I think it'll be early tomorrow afternoon by the time you reach the Queen's coffin. Thank you very much for talking to us. And if we just pan across, you can get a sense of the scale and the size of the queue here in Southwark Park, reaching to the gates in the distance. You might be able to see there where the queue leaves the park and makes its way down to the River Thames as the people waiting in line patiently begin that 5-mile journey between here and Westminster, becoming some of the last to view the Queen's coffin as it continues that lying in state. And as many people have said to us here today, in her death, Queen Elizabeth II has brought people together as she did throughout her reign.
Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Blake there, live in southeast London. And these are the latest pictures from Westminster Hall. If you can't get to London, but you want to pay your respects, the BBC is offering a continuous 24-hour view of the Queen's lying in state. The service is available on the BBC homepage, the BBC News website and app, the iPlayer, on BBC Parliament and the Red Button. Well, the Queen's lying in state will end at 6:30 on Monday morning. Then at 10:44, her coffin will be moved from Westminster Hall a short distance away to Westminster Abbey, where her state funeral service will be held. The Royal Navy's state gun carriage, seen here rehearsing, will bear the coffin drawn by 142 sailors. Senior members of the royal family, including the new king and his sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, will walk just behind the procession. Then at 11 o'clock, the Queen's funeral, expected to be attended by 2,000 guests, will begin with the service led by the Very Reverend Dr. David Hoyle. And he's been speaking to my colleague, Rita Chakrabarti.
Leading the Queen's state funeral on Monday is a momentous task for Dr. David Hoyle. He says he seeks to balance formal mourning and private grief.
Right at the heart of this is a family funeral. We mustn't forget that. Deeply personal and a very difficult thing for a family to navigate. But this is also a celebration of a quite extraordinary life. This is an opportunity for us all to mourn, all to remember. And this is also a place for a bit of hope. That's the job of the church.
And what about the Queen's own personal links with the Abbey?
They were profound. I point out from time to time that this is the place where she took the promises that defined her life. So this is the place where she married in 1947, and she made those promises that sustained that extraordinary public marriage that they then lived out. And this is the place where she took her coronation oaths. So the Abbey shaped her life. I met her on a number of occasions occasionally. She talked about the Abbey with great affection, and she talked about what had happened here.
And what about your own personal feelings about leading the funeral ceremony? Are you nervous?
If I sit still for too long and start thinking about the significance of the moment and the eyes that are on you, then yes, honestly, of course I am. there's a huge sense of privilege. I mean, what an extraordinary place to be at a moment like this. There's a bit of a sense of responsibility. I also have around me a quite wonderful group of people. So this place steps up on these occasions. It will be fine.
And at the end of it all, what would you like people to be able to take away from it?
I think we need to recollect this is a state funeral. So this really is something that is intended to be seen. It's very visual. It's also intended to be heard. I think one of the things we are trying to do is to take all that emotion, all that interest, all that care that we can see in the queue for the lying in state, that we can see in the parks where people are laying flowers, and feel that we have managed in the Abbey to provide a focus for that. We've put it into words, we've given the grief somewhere to go.
Dr. Hoyle, thank you very much.
A pleasure. Thank you.
The Very Reverend Dr. David Hoyle speaking to my colleague Rita Chakrabarti. Well, tonight details have been released of how the public can watch the Queen's funeral on Monday. The service will be broadcast on TV and radio by national broadcasters. There will be special viewing places along the route of the funeral procession in London and Windsor. And there'll be big screens in city centres and 125 cinemas around the UK. Some are still hoping to travel to London from across the country to be closer to the funeral, as Lakshmi Ghoshpal now explains.
Preparing for a pilgrimage by getting kitted out for camping.
I've got a couple of jumpers, I've got a nice blanket as well.
Alex Bray is leaving his bedroom in Home Firth in West Yorkshire to head to the streets of London with a tent to pay his respects to the Queen.
Hi Johnny, are you all right?
He and his brother Jonathan will set off at 5 in the morning and stay until after the state funeral on Monday.
After so long, it's just nice to say kind of a proper goodbye and be part of the atmosphere as well. It's going to be sad, but I think it's going to be a real sense of unity.
Hi Mum.
They'll be joining their mother Alison, who's already made the journey down to see the Queen lying in state.
Why was it important for you to all be there as a family?
She's brought so many generations together. She's brought my family together. You know, my grandma's got special memories, my mum's got special memories, I've got special memories, and to be there together as a family, just seeing that moment will mean a lot.
As many people across the country to come together, be it brothers, be it family, be it friends, and again as a community to be together as one.
The Queen's power to transcend generations lives on in her death. The Richmond family from Rugby drove down early to London so their children could lay flowers.
Willow was quite affected by it. She is very taken with the Queen and her handbags and her dresses.
I'm happy and sad, and I'm excited to go and see the Queen.
By car, by coach, by rail, the capital continues to swell with people from around the country, making their way to be part of this moment in history, including these lifelong friends from Manchester.
We're going to see ABBA, and then straight from ABBA, we're going to join the queues and pay our respects to the Queen.
Even those not travelling can be part of shared grieving. In the Aberdeenshire fishing village of Gurdon, this pub will be showing Monday's proceedings on screen, one of many community screenings of the funeral around the country.
It's a large wake, and yeah, we're just inviting the locals to come in and take part in this experience, because no one really in the last 70 years has experienced anything like this, so it's going to be something new for all of us.
Rituals have always been an important part of monarchy and of mourning. For Alex, like for so many, the way to process the death of the Queen is by joining others to grieve and to reflect together. Lakshmi Gopal, BBC News.
And you can find more information on how you can watch the state funeral on Monday. That's at our website, bbc.co.uk/news, and by using the BBC News app. Leaders from around the world have begun arriving ahead of the Queen's state funeral, including, in the last few minutes, President Joe Biden. Around 2,000 guests will attend. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams is here. Paul, the sheer scale, the numbers of world leaders and dignitaries in attendance, pretty rare.
It's pretty hard to get your head around it, frankly, Clive. 500 dignitaries, 100 presidents and heads of government, 20 senior royals. You know, one state visit a year is stressful enough. This is basically 100 in one go. The irony is, of course, that many of those world leaders should have been across on the other side of the Atlantic right now at the annual meeting of the UN General Assembly. So it's fair to say there's been a lot of very hasty rescheduling. Liz Truss, by the way, is not now holding a planned meeting with Joe Biden here in London. They've decided to do that next week in New York. I think that's a measure of the desire of everyone to concentrate on the very reason they're here. Will there be any diplomacy? Well, bear in mind that tomorrow they'll all be at Buckingham Palace for a state reception. So perhaps some will grab an opportunity to discuss the issues of the day. Spare a thought, by the way, for King Charles. He's about to put to lay his mother to rest. His family has not had an opportunity to draw breath, and now he's about to host the biggest state event of his, or indeed anyone else's, lifetime. But you know, here was a woman, his mother, the late Queen, who spent her entire life visiting and being visited by all manner of foreign leaders of all descriptions, democrats and despots, heroes and villains, and she treated them all with exactly the same decorum. Not everyone will agree with this, but just perhaps it's fitting that as all of these leaders come here, including some whose human rights records we might find deeply troubling, are treated in exactly the same way. The politics can wait.
Okay, Paul, thank you. Paul Adams. A memorial service in honour of the Queen has been held at a church in Kenya. She was a visitor back in 1952, shortly before hearing the news that her father, King George VI, had died and she had become sovereign. Today, the St. Philip's Anglican Church at the foot of Mount Kenya was filled to capacity as the congregation reflected on the Queen's life and the church's special connection to her. Our senior Africa correspondent, Anne Soy, has that story.
On the foothills of Mount Kenya, a church with a nostalgic connection to the Queen. Today, the congregation gathered to honor her. They reflected on her life of service, commitment to duty, and her sense of humor.
I would like to look at where she gathered her own strength and inspiration.
None of the members here was present during her visit 70 years ago, but through it, they felt a deep connection to the monarch. It is here at the St. Philip's Anglican Church in central Kenya that Queen Elizabeth attended her last Sunday service as princess. On that morning of 2nd of February 1952, this Brazilian rosewood tree was planted. It has stood tall throughout the Queen's reign and continues to be a living reminder of where it all began.
The royal visitors stepped off into the hot sunshine of Nairobi.
She was here to represent her ailing father, King George VI. He died just days later, and so she became Queen unexpectedly here in central Kenya.
I was in school, and I remember that we had to line up while we are in primary just to see her. And for today, I still have that memory of her.
The Queen still remembered the small church even during her coronation and gifted them a souvenir from the ceremony.
She sent a piece of the Westminster Abbey carpet, which we keep very safely, as a memory of her visit. It means a lot to us, together with the coat of arms and the other things that back up her connection with this church.
Deep and lasting memories of a royal from afar, but so close to the hearts of the people here at the St. Philip's Anglican Church. Anne Soy, BBC News, Narumoru.
To other news now, and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says investigations into possible Russian war crimes are continuing in the northeastern city of Izium. Several bodies have already been exhumed from a mass burial site on the edge of the city, which was recently retaken from Russian forces. Ukrainian officials say more than 440 people are buried there. Izium is just one of several areas recently liberated by Ukrainian troops. However, heavy fighting is continuing in the areas circled just over there. Our correspondent James Waterhouse has the latest from the capital, Kyiv.
Ukraine is as determined to document as it is to fight. In Izium, liberation has turned more bitter than sweet. Hundreds of bodies, now a dossier of evidence over claims of Russian war crimes. All uncovered after a series of Ukrainian counter-offensives in the northeast. In newly released footage, what Russia wants to say is that their plans have not changed. As they look to hit back, the US had this warning if chemical or nuclear weapons were being considered.
Don't. It will change the face of war, unlike anything since World War II.
What is never altered is the enduring human cost of this war. Alexander Shapoval performed as a ballet dancer for 28 seasons at the Kiev Opera House before volunteering to fight for Ukraine. This week, he was killed in a mortar strike in the east.
There's not a single person in the theatre who wouldn't love Alexander. He was a talented artist and an incredibly kind person. He could not go and defend his family, friends, and all Ukrainians.
What this is a combination of grief and pride, not just of Alexander's accomplishments in the Opera House, but because of the cause he died for. And that's the point. Ukraine has always known why it was fighting and the price it was willing to pay. It's hard to imagine another escalation in a conflict already full of incomprehensible pain. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kiev.
Hundreds of people gathered outside New Scotland Yard in London to protest the shooting dead of an unarmed black man earlier this month. Many of the demonstrators carried placards bearing pictures of Chris Cabba, who was 24. His family has accused the Metropolitan Police of racism, and the police watchdog is carrying out an investigation. Our correspondent Celestina Oluludade has that story.
Tender love and support for a family that continue to grieve. A shared trauma for which they are demanding answers.
Did the officers know that it was Chris in the car, or were they simply following a suspect vehicle? The suspended officer must be interviewed under caution, without delay, and keep family informed of this. There should be a charging decision within weeks and not months.
Chris Cabba was fatally shot by a Metropolitan Police officer on the 5th of September. He was unarmed and no firearms were found in the car he was driving. Police say the vehicle was linked to a previous firearms incident. The car was not registered to Mr. Cabba. His family say he was borrowing it from a friend. The officer that fired the fatal shot has been suspended. An investigation has been launched by the Independent Office for Police Conduct. The Met says it supports the investigation.
Well, the police watchdog says it must explore all the circumstances surrounding Mr. Cabba's death, including how officers came to be aware of the vehicle Mr. Cabba was driving.
The investigation is expected to take 6 to 9 months, a timeframe people here say is much too long. Celestina Olulode, BBC News.
The Metropolitan Police has confirmed that one of the 2 officers stabbed in central London yesterday has been discharged from hospital. The other officer is still receiving treatment. A man in his 20s has been arrested on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm and assaulting an emergency worker. He remains in custody. Hundreds of thousands of people in Japan have been urged to evacuate their homes amid warnings of unprecedented risks from an approaching storm. A special typhoon warning has been issued as the south of the country braces for the arrival of what could be the biggest storm in decades. Now, with the day's sport, here's Ollie Foster at the BBC Sports Centre. Hi there, Ollie.
Evening to you, Clive. Football has resumed after the sport was put on hold last weekend. Today's goals follow the news, but if you'd like the results, then you can stay right there. Manchester City have moved to the top of the Premier League, beating Wolves 3-0. The match at Molineux, like hundreds across the country, was preceded by a minute's silence, and in the 70th minute there was applause from players and supporters to mark every year of Queen Elizabeth II's reign. 2 points behind them after beating Dundee United 2-1. Antonio Colak scored both goals against the bottom side. There were also wins for Hibernian and Livingston. It was goalless between St Johnstone and Ross County. It's the opening weekend in the Women's Super League. Maya Le Tissier scored twice on her debut for Manchester United. And one of England's European Championship winners, Alessia Russo, was also on the score sheet. All the goals came in the first half at Leigh Sports Village as they won 4-0 against Reading. Rugby League's grand final will see Leeds face St Helens. Saints, who are chasing an unprecedented 4th title in a row, beat Salford 19 points to 12 in their semi-final. Joe Curry reports.
Like other sports, Rugby League paid its respects to the Queen before action got underway. With the grand final calling, reigning champions St Helens were at home to Salford, a team who finished 6th in the regular season. It was Saints who struck first, a kick through from Johnny Lomax, Joe Batchelor in the right place to ground. And the pair linked up again moments later with the same outcome. Salford fans could have been forgiven for fearing a long afternoon. Until this moment of madness from Morgan Knowles. The arm twister on Chris Atkin looking even worse on the replays. Knowles sent to the sin bin as a result. And Salford took just seconds to make their extra player count as Callum Watkins went over to give them hope before the break. As the bad tempers and big hits continued. After the restart, Salford got themselves to within a point of Saints. But St Helens know exactly what it takes to win a semi-final. And they once again found a way to put themselves ahead. And with it, put the game out of reach. They'll now meet Leeds in the grand final at Old Trafford in a week's time, aiming for a 4th consecutive title. Joe Curry, BBC News.
In cricket, after losing 8 one-day finals in a row, Kent have finally won one. Joey Everson was the man of the match against Lancashire, made 97 with the bat and took the winning wicket as they clinched the one-day cup by 21 runs at Trent Bridge. Well, in the Rugby Union Premiership, Saracens came from 17 points down to beat Harlequins by 30 points to 27 at the Stoop. Elliot Daly won it for them with that long-range penalty. There were also wins for Northampton, Leicester, Bristol and Sale. It's also a very busy day in the United Rugby Championship. You'll find all the details of that on the BBC Sport website. Clive.
Ollie, many thanks for that. Ollie Foster there. And the Queen famously had a passion for horse racing, and many in the sport have voiced their sadness over her death. Since her first meeting at Royal Ascot as sovereign in 1952, the Queen's horses have won more than 20 times. Here's our sports correspondent, Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes.
After working closely with the Queen as her racing and bloodstock advisor for more than 2 decades, there are very few people outside of the royal household who knew Her Majesty as well as John Warren.
She was so clear-thinking. She was a tremendous listener and always got to the punchline. And she was able to see the best in people. And she was very pragmatic.
The Queen spoke to John Warren several times a week and was with him at Balmoral the weekend before she passed away.
It's comforting to know that right at the end of her life, with all her family around, coming and going, and being able to talk horses right to the end was a very important memory I will have of the Queen. That, in a way, is the most comforting thing for people to know, that the Queen was in a really happy, good place to the very end, which is how extraordinary to live a lovely, incredible, long, full life right to the very, very end. Quite remarkable.
As the son-in-law to the Queen's former racing manager, Lord Porchester, John Warren is long established in the royal racing family. But since taking over in 2001, he guided Her Majesty to some of her most memorable successes, including the Ascot Gold Cup winning filly Estimate, whom she bred.
The memory that will stay with me forever is the Queen's eyes welling up with tears, and the emotion in her face was something that, even knowing her for nearly 40 years, that I'd never seen that emotion so relevant. And that was such a joyful occasion. And then At 87, I think the Queen was, she nearly ran down to the winning enclosure. I've never seen her more animated, and her adrenaline took over. And we got down from the stands and went out into the paddock, and the crowd were quite remarkable. They lifted the Queen to the winning enclosure.
Over her lifetime, the Queen bred and owned more than 1,000 winners, but it's clear she loved the taking part just as much as the winning.
The Queen adored naming her horses, and being as intellectual as she was, she would spend a lot of her spare time working out the name of the sire and the name of the dam and trying to find a clever name for the horse that related to how it was bred.
It's too early to discuss royal racing succession. The Queen Consort Camilla has been mooted as the obvious option. But for now, the sport is still coming to terms with the loss of what many have called racing's best friend. Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes, BBC News.
As we near the eve of the Queen's state funeral, our home editor now, Mark Easton, looks back at some of the major changes in society she lived through as the longest reigning monarch in British history.
Into the grey of post-war austerity, a beautiful young woman was presented as a new beginning for an impoverished kingdom and its crumbling empire. Down the backbone. Queen Elizabeth II took her throne amid social upheaval. With increasing tensions at home and declining influence abroad, a huge responsibility was placed upon the shoulders of the young Queen. The ambition was for a new Elizabethan age. Some feared she was doomed to fail, but Elizabeth was nothing if not determined. In the 60s, the Queen became a bridgehead between continuity and change. In science and in culture, Elizabeth walked a line between tradition and modernity.
Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl, but she doesn't have a lot to say.
Quietly and uncontroversially, Elizabeth worked to ensure the monarchy was not left behind by the change sweeping across her kingdom.
She seemed pleasant enough to us, you know, made us relax.
They wanna make a mind.
Amid the social conflict of the 70s, the Queen ruled a less deferential kingdom. A time when authority and the established order was being challenged. But predictions of a wave of republicanism proved unfounded. And marking 25 years on the throne, the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977 was a moment when the nation came together to celebrate the monarchy.
When I was 21, I pledged my life to the service of our people. Although that vow was made in my salad days when I was green in judgment, I do not regret nor retract one word of it.
Stars in your eyes, little one, where do you go?
The 1980s saw the Queen encourage the next generation of royals to take centre stage.
The land of make-believe.
The decade saw the nation at war, not least with itself. But the exhibition of family values threatened to become a pantomime as the strains of royal relationships emerged. A soap opera with the Queen as long-suffering matriarch.
Everybody hurts.
4 decades after ascending her throne, the pressures on Elizabeth became incendiary.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure.
Intimate holiday pictures of the Duchess of York in
Any hope of presenting the royals as a model family was sustained almost entirely by a monarch who kept private feelings separate from public duties. But her strategy of impassive figurehead was to be sorely tested.
A short while ago, Buckingham Palace confirmed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales.
Diana's death prompted an extraordinary emotional outpouring,
Goodbye, England's rose.
with demands that the Queen share her personal grief with the world. Elizabeth, though, maintained her distance.
Where lives were torn apart.
True to her conviction of what a monarch should be, but it was a significant gamble in a society that increasingly equated authenticity with wearing your heart on your sleeve. A critical test of relevance for the monarchy and for Elizabeth was her Golden Jubilee in 2002. Some predicted she would be exposed as an aging queen unable to adapt, out of date and out of touch in a new millennium.
The Jubilee girl is here, Pasha!
Contrary to many commentators' expectations, vast numbers joined in the festivities. To survive tumultuous change, the magic ingredient appeared to be consistency. By the 2010s, 4/5 of Elizabeth's subjects had never known another monarch. At the opening of the Olympic Games in London, organisers placed the Queen centre stage in telling the story of Britain. A global audience saw a monarch with the self-confidence to be part of an elaborate joke.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
Without ever losing her dignity.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
She had become a national treasure, a jewel in her own crown.
My government will hold a referendum on membership of the European Union.
But 4 years on, and Elizabeth found herself on the throne of a disunited kingdom. The Queen sought to emphasise her neutrality. The palace, horrified at claims she had views. Amid Brexit rancour, her message was of love.
The cumulative impact of thousands of small acts of goodness can be bigger than we imagine.
The final decade of the Queen's long life was tinged with regret and loss. Philip, her liege man, her strength and stay, was no longer at her side. A pandemic of dishonour and disappointment arrived at the door of the House of Windsor. Elizabeth's health began to suffer. But as she physically withdrew from public life, her importance as a national figurehead became more pronounced. Across 8 decades, the Elizabethan age was the frame in which the nation's affairs were set, and Elizabeth, the golden thread through the history of her kingdom. A great queen, with values for all time.
Reflections on a long life. Mark Easton reporting there. Now, time for a look at the weather. Here's Sarah Keith-Lucas. Hi there.
Hi Clive. Well, we've had a lot of dry weather out there today, some blue sky by day and glorious colours painted the sky as the sun set a little bit earlier on this evening. As we head through the rest of tonight then, we're going to be keeping some of these clearer spells across southern parts of the UK. Further north we've got more cloud around, and that cloud will just drift its way a bit further south over the next 24 hours or so. So 1 or 2 showers tonight to come across parts of Scotland, and then later in the night drifting through Northern Ireland into the far north of England as well. But further south, that's where we keep the clearest skies for longest, so perhaps even temperatures low enough for just a touch of grass frost for central southern England and South Wales first thing. Now through the day tomorrow, a bit more cloud in general than we've seen today. 1 or 2 showers again for parts of Scotland, a few for Northern Ireland into Northern England as well. Not quite as windy as it has been, but still a bit of a northerly breeze blowing along those east coasts, bringing the odd shower. So temperatures there in the east between about 12 to 16 degrees. Further west, the warmest weather highs up to around 18 for the likes of Cardiff. Now, if you are heading to London over the next few days, the weather looks predominantly dry. There will be a little bit more cloud than we've seen of late, but less wind, and those temperatures just picking up a little bit over the next few days. So high pressure very much dominating our weather as we head on into Monday for Her Late Majesty's state funeral. Most of us set to stay dry, just a small chance of 1 or 2 showers, a bit more rain into the northwest of Scotland, but it will be a touch warmer by the time we get to Monday, with top temperatures up to around 19 degrees. Clive.
Okay, Sarah, thank you. Sarah Keith-Lucas there. That's it. Continuing coverage of the lying in state, of course, on the BBC News channel and on our webpage. But from me and the team, have a very good night.